Have you ever, noticed that your absolute peak motivation to just completely change your life always hits at the absolute worst times?
Oh, yeah. Like when you're trying to fall asleep.
Yes, exactly. It's always at 11:30 p.m. You're lying in bed, you're staring at the ceiling, and suddenly you get this overwhelming, fiery urge to just, I don't know, conquer the world.
Right. You're going to learn a new language, get into the best shape of your life, write a whole business plan by Tuesday.
Yeah, you feel like you could run a marathon right then and there. But then, and this is the worst part, you wake up at 7 a.m., you look at your running shoes or your textbook, and you feel absolutely nothing.
Just completely empty. The drive is gone.
It's totally gone. And I think for a lot of people, that's incredibly frustrating.
It's one of the most frustrating quirks of human biology, honestly, because we experience that midnight surge and we assume, we've had this permanent epiphany.
And I finally figured it out.
Exactly. And then when it evaporates 8 hours later, the natural reaction is to just think there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
We assume we lack willpower, or maybe the goal just wasn't right for us.
We treat it like a personality flaw.
Right. Instead of treating motivation like what it actually is, which is a highly volatile chemical state.
And that is exactly what we are dismantling today. So welcome to today's deep dive. We're officially stepping away from, the cheesy motivational posters, and we're jumping right into the actual biological machinery of human achievement.
It's going to be a fun one.
It really is. Because if you are listening to this right now, we know exactly what kind of learner you are. You are the ultimate learner. You're insanely curious. You want to get to the absolute bottom of how things work. And you want the actual blueprint for mastering your own potential, but without drowning in all that fluffy self-help stuff.
Yeah, we're skipping the fluff today. We are looking strictly at the science of getting better at getting better.
So to do that, we've pulled together an incredible stack of sources. We're looking at some heavy-hitting, peer-reviewed research.
Yeah, we've got Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory, which is huge.
Huge. Plus, insights on deliberate practice and microlearning from cognitive science and various educational platforms.
And we also have a really fascinating breakdown on the neurology of exercise as a literal cognitive enhancer.
Yes, the exercise stuff blew my mind. Oh, and we're also pulling from a University of Phoenix research paper on workplace burnout, which ties into all of this perfectly.
It really does. All these pieces connect in a very specific way.
Right. So the mission for today's deep dive is to give you a complete, actionable blueprint for self-mastery. We're going to move from that initial spark of desire in your brain over to the psychological frameworks that actually sustain it.
And then into the exact methods for elite skill acquisition.
Right. And finally, how you can physically optimize the biological hardware of your brain to support everything else. So let's just jump right in. Let's go back to that 11:30 p.m. motivation.
The midnight surge.
Yeah. Every pursuit starts with a goal fueled by desire. But to understand why that energy fades by morning, we have to look at the neurochemical difference between, wanting something and actually doing it.
So motivation is primarily driven by two neurotransmitters acting in tandem. We're talking about dopamine and norepinephrine.
Okay, dopamine. Let's start there, because I feel like dopamine is everywhere right now.
It is, but to really understand how it works, we need to completely redefine it. Because popular culture has done a massive disservice to this chemical.
How so?
Well, it's constantly referred to as the reward molecule. Like it's the thing you feel when you eat a piece of cake or cross a finish line or, get a promotion.
Right. I always thought dopamine was just the pleasure chemical.
Most people do.
Yeah.
But biologically, that is fundamentally incorrect.
Wait, really? If it isn't the reward, what is it?
It is the chemical of anticipation.
Anticipation?
Yes. Dopamine does not fire during the experience of pleasure. It fires in anticipation of the pleasure. It's the molecule of desire and seeking.
So it gives a task value.
Exactly. It makes you want to pursue the thing. So when you're lying in bed at night, setting that huge new goal, you get a massive spike of dopamine because your brain is vividly anticipating the reward of achieving it.
Oh, wow. So you're basically experiencing the chemical rush of the outcome without having to do any of the actual work in that moment.
Right. You get the rush just from thinking about the finish line.
That makes so much sense. I mean, it's why adding items to an online shopping cart feels so good. Right?
Oh, absolutely. The shopping cart is pure dopamine.
But then when the package actually shows up 3 days later, the excitement is usually just, it's kind of gone. I always wondered why that happens.
Because the dopamine spiked during the anticipation of buying it, not the actual acquisition of having it.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, so dopamine primes the neurons in your prefrontal cortex. It essentially points and says, hey, That thing over there has high value. Go get it.
But dopamine alone can't actually make you act, right?
No, it can't. And that is where the second neurotransmitter comes in, norepinephrine.
Okay, so what does norepinephrine do?
Norepinephrine acts in the present moment. It is responsible for arousal, alertness, and providing the physical urgency to actually execute a task.
So if dopamine points at the target, norepinephrine pulls the trigger.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it, yeah. If you have a healthy dopamine response, you might sit down at your desk to write that business plan.
Because you anticipate the reward of finishing it.
Right. But without an appropriate norepinephrine response, the stimuli in front of you, the keyboard, the blank screen, they have no weight. The want is there, but the readiness to carry it out is completely absent.
You just feel that heavy, sluggish inertia.
Exactly. You want to do it, but you just can't seem to start.
Which brings us to a huge problem that our sources get into. Because we have to talk about what happens when this very delicate dopamine system gets hijacked.
Oh, yeah, by modern technology.
Right. Specifically through things like doom scrolling on social media.
The doom scrolling trap is a textbook example of dopamine downregulation.
Downregulation, break that down for us.
Remember how dopamine is all about anticipation?
Yeah.
When you scroll through short-form videos on your phone, you are artificially stimulating that feeling of anticipation.
Yeah.
You're always waiting for the next funny or interesting video.
And the reward comes instantly, right? Just with a single flick of your thumb.
Exactly. So you are flooding your brain with massive, unnatural spikes of cheap dopamine over and over again.
But the brain doesn't like that, does it? The brain is always seeking balance, like homeostasis.
Right. It doesn't like massive, unnatural spikes of anything. So when it's constantly bombarded by these dopamine floods, the brain actually takes defensive action.
What does it do?
It literally reduces the number of active dopamine receptors. Specifically, what we call the D2 receptor density decreases.
Oh, wow. So it actually changes the physical structure of how you receive the chemical.
Yeah. Think of it like walking out of a dark room into a blindingly bright, snowy day.
Oh, sure. You squint.
Right? Your pupils physically constrict to let less light in to protect your retina. Your brain does the exact same thing with dopamine receptors to protect itself from the flood of your phone. It hides the receptors.
Okay, so if I'm sitting in my car right now listening to this, what does a decrease in D2 receptors actually mean for my daily life?
It means that when you finally put your phone down and try to do something that requires sustained, difficult effort.
Like studying for an exam or learning to code.
Exactly. Your brain physically does not have enough active receptors to generate the motivation you need for that harder task.
Because the hard task requires a normal level of dopamine to feel valuable, but your receptors are all hidden away.
Yep. You have chemically blunted your own drive for difficult tasks by gorging on easy anticipation.
Man, honestly, it's an incredible relief to hear that. Because when we can't focus, we always tend to blame our character. We think, oh, I'm just lazy.
Right, we moralize it.
Yeah. But it's not a moral failing. It's an actual mechanical, chemical adaptation in the brain.
Exactly. Which perfectly sets up the insights we have from the J.W. Radford sources on the difference between desire and discipline.
Okay, let's get into that. Because desire is purely emotional, right? It's that huge dopamine rush.
It is, and it gives you a massive temporary boost in productivity. It gives you a ton of confidence early on.
But emotions are incredibly fragile under stress.
Very fragile. The moment you encounter real friction, like you get tired, a task takes way longer than you thought, or you just get confused by something, that emotional drive just evaporates.
So relying on excitement alone is basically a recipe for failure over the long term.
Pretty much. Because discipline, on the other hand, is not emotional at all. It is behavioral.
And the Radford text cites some fascinating neuroscience research from Stanford University on this.
Yeah, the Stanford research explains exactly why discipline always wins over a long timeline. It shows that when you repeat an action, even when you really, really don't feel like doing it, you are physically strengthening neural pathways in the brain.
So through repetition, these behaviors actually transition from requiring conscious, heavy cognitive effort to just becoming automatic.
Exactly. Small, structured habits will always outperform intense, dramatic bursts of temporary motivation.
Because the small habits survive the emotional inconsistency.
Right. Waking up at the exact same time, sitting at the exact same desk, following a specific sequence of actions every morning.
Like making coffee, opening the laptop, putting on the headphones.
Yep. Those routines eventually require very little dopamine to execute because the neural pathway is so well paved.
So desire gets you off the couch on day 1, but discipline creates the systems that keep you moving on day 50 when the dopamine is totally gone.
Exactly.
Think of desire like a match in the wind. It flares up incredibly bright, it's hot, it's super dramatic, but the slightest gust of stress or distraction just blows it out completely.
I like that analogy.
And discipline is more like a heavy cast iron furnace. It takes way more effort to build it and get it heated up, but once it is burning, it sustains that fire regardless of the weather outside.
That is the exact mechanism. You're moving from a fragile chemical reliance to a robust structural reality.
Okay, but I am going to push back on this just a bit.
Sure, go for it.
Because I think a lot of people hear this and they immediately think of the outliers. What about the people who are just like maniacally driven?
The obsessed artists or the crazy entrepreneurs.
Yeah. The people who seem to run purely on immense passion. Doesn't sheer life or death level desire somehow override the need for all these structured habits?
It's really tempting to look at those outliers and assume their passion is their only fuel. But if you examine highly driven individuals closely, you will almost always find rigorous structure underneath that obsession.
Really? Even the supposedly chaotic ones.
Even them. The sources actually point out a really fascinating trap here. Excessive desire without structure actively undermines long-term success.
How does it undermine it?
It creates deep frustration. If you have this massive ambition, but you have no daily system, you end up waiting for the perfect timing or the right mood to harness that massive energy.
Oh, I know that feeling so well. You're just waiting for inspiration to strike.
Right. And when life gets messy, which it always does, high desire without habits just leads straight to emotional burnout.
Because you care so much, but you aren't actually doing anything.
Exactly. You get stuck in this really painful cycle. You constantly start massive projects. You burn out halfway through because you have no system, and then you have to restart months later when the desire finally builds back up.
That is brutal. Okay, so we absolutely have to build the cast iron furnace of discipline. We need structure.
We do.
But that introduces a pretty massive psychological hurdle, because if we are just relying on strict, repetitive habits and routines, how do we prevent ourselves from feeling trapped by them?
That is the danger of strict discipline.
Right. Because nobody wants to feel like a robot on an assembly line just executing tasks because a Google Calendar told them to.
And if your discipline feels like a prison, you will eventually rebel against it. I don't care how strong your neural pathways are, your psyche will reject it.
So how do we fix that?
This is where we have to shift gears. We have to move from the neuroscience of how we act to the psychological framework of why we act.
Okay.
To sustain the engine without suffocating the fire, we look at one of the most robust frameworks in all of modern psychology, self-determination theory.
Self-determination theory, or SDT. I was so excited to get to this part.
It's foundational.
It really is. This was formally introduced in 1985 by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, and it completely revolutionized how we look at human drive.
It did, because before SDT, a lot of psychology was heavily focused on behaviorism.
Right, which is basically the idea that you just condition people with rewards and punishments, the classic carrot and the stick.
Exactly. Behaviorism basically assumed we were just empty vessels waiting to be trotted into action by external forces.
Just reacting to whatever treat or shock we get.
Yeah. But Deci and Ryan challenged that entirely. They proposed this macro theory of human motivation based on the idea that we actually have innate, universal psychological needs.
Needs that go beyond just food and water.
Right. Just as a plant needs sunlight, soil, and water to physically grow, the human psyche requires specific psychological nutrients for optimal growth, motivation, and mental health.
And there are 3 basic psychological needs in this framework, and the research shows they are universal across basically all cultures.
They are. Let's break down this holy trinity of motivation.
Let's do it. The first one is autonomy. Now, autonomy is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and usually people take it to just mean independence.
Like being a lone wolf.
Yeah, exactly. But in the context of SDT, it doesn't just mean doing everything alone, does it?
Not at all. That's a huge misconception. You can be highly autonomous while working on a massive team, or even while following a very strict leader.
Wait, how does that work?
Because autonomy in SDT is the desire to be the causal agent of one's own life. It is the feeling of psychological liberty, volition, and willingness.
Volition, so it's about choice.
Yes. It means that you endorse your own actions. You are acting in harmony with your integrated sense of self. Even if someone else gave you the task, You autonomously agree with doing it.
Oh, I see. So the opposite of autonomy is not teamwork.
No, the opposite of autonomy is feeling coerced, manipulated, or externally controlled.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so the second need in the Trinity is competence.
Yes, competence.
And this is the inherent desire to experience mastery and to effectively interact with your environment. It's that deeply satisfying feeling of, I know exactly what I'm doing right now, and I can literally see myself getting better at it.
It is the urge to seek out challenges that are perfectly matched to your abilities and to extend your capacities.
Yeah.
We all naturally want to feel capable.
For sure. And the third need is relatedness.
Right. This is the need to form strong, meaningful bonds, to feel connected to others, and to experience a genuine sense of belonging and contribution to a wider group.
So autonomy, competence, and relatedness. If you have those three, you thrive.
Exactly. But the real brilliance of SDT is that it views motivation as a continuum rather than a simple on or off switch.
Right. It isn't just about whether you are motivated or unmotivated. There are shades to it.
Exactly. So we start at the far left of this continuum with motivation.
A motivation. That sounds pretty bleak.
It is. This is the state of lacking any intention to act whatsoever. You're just going through the motions, usually because you don't value the activity at all, or perhaps you feel entirely incompetent at it.
You're completely checked out.
Completely.
Yeah.
But moving to the right, along the continuum, we enter extrinsic motivation.
Okay, extrinsic, meaning you're doing something for an outside reason.
Right, you're doing it to attain a separable outcome, right? Working for a paycheck or studying to get a grade.
But Deci and Ryan actually developed something called organismic integration theory, which breaks extrinsic motivation down even further.
They did. They broke it into 4 distinct stages based on how deeply you have internalized the behavior.
Let's walk through those because this is where it gets really interesting for anyone trying to build habits. The lowest and most fragile form of extrinsic motivation is external regulation.
Right. This is pure behaviorism. You are doing the task strictly for a reward or to avoid a punishment.
It is the least autonomous state.
Yes. And the problem here is that the second the reward disappears or the threat of punishment is gone, the behavior stops entirely.
Like a kid who only cleans their room because they'll get grounded if they don't. The minute the parents leave the house, the cleaning stops.
Perfect example. So the next stage up from that is introjected regulation.
Interjected.
Yeah. In this stage, you have taken the regulation inside yourself, but you haven't fully accepted it as your own.
What does that look like in practice?
It means you are doing the task to avoid feeling guilt or anxiety, or maybe to boost your ego and pride. It is heavily driven by contingent self-esteem.
Ah, so you are still being controlled, but the tyrant is now inside your own head.
Exactly. You're guilting yourself into doing the work.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is deeply exhausting. But then we cross a really critical threshold into the third stage, identified regulation.
Okay, this is where motivation starts becoming healthy and sustainable.
Yes. Here, you consciously value the goal. You actually see the action as personally important to you.
Right, so you might not inherently enjoy the specific task in the moment. Like a medical student staying up all night to study organic chemistry. They probably don't love staring at flashcards at 3 a.m.
They definitely don't. But they fully identify with the value of the outcome because they truly want to be a doctor.
So the autonomy is high, even if the task isn't fun.
Exactly. And that leads to the highest and most autonomous form of extrinsic motivation, integrated regulation.
Integrate, so it's fully a part of you now?
Yes. At this stage, the goal is fully assimilated into your sense of self and your core values.
It shares a lot of qualities with pure intrinsic motivation, doesn't it?
It does. Intrinsic motivation is doing an activity entirely for the inherent joy and interest of the task itself, like playing a video game or painting just for fun.
Right.
Integrated regulation means you are doing something hard because it is a profound expression of who you are. The discipline is part of your identity.
And if you apply this entire framework to the real world, it completely changes how we view exhaustion and burnout.
Oh, fundamentally.
Let's bring in the University of Phoenix research on workplace burnout by Dr. Julie Overbay and Dr. Pamela Gordon, because this was incredibly revealing.
Their white paper is fantastic. They examined how leadership models that either support or thwart autonomy directly impact employee burnout.
And the critical insight here is that workplace burnout is very rarely a failure of individual resilience.
That's just how we usually talk about it, right?
Totally. Society always frames burnout as a personal weakness, like you just couldn't handle the stress, or your time management was bad, or you just didn't do enough yoga on the weekends.
Right, blame the individual. But the research shows burnout is primarily a structural failure of autonomy.
So if you are sitting in traffic commuting to a job you hate, or you're staring at a massive pile of coursework and you feel that deep, bone-weary exhaustion.
It might not actually be the sheer volume of work that is draining you.
Wow.
Yeah. It is highly likely that your basic psychological needs are being systemically starved.
So when roles lack voice, when employees are shut out of shared decision-making, and when they suffer from limited control over how they actually execute their tasks, exhaustion just spikes dramatically.
Because your autonomy is dead. You might have a micromanager who is actively destroying your autonomy. Or you might have a system that provides zero feedback, which completely starves your need for competence.
Dr. Gordon notes something in the research that really struck me. She says, autonomy is not the absence of structure. It is the presence of meaningful participation.
That is such a powerful distinction.
It really is. And it perfectly bridges the gap between the discipline we talked about earlier and self-determination.
How so?
Well, you can build a highly structured, rigorous, disciplined routine for yourself. But if you design it like a prison warden, if you use interjected regulation and just guilt yourself into following it every day, you will burn out.
Oh, 100%. To sustain the discipline, you actually have to choose it. You have to integrate it into your values.
You must have meaningful participation in the design of your own life.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's summarize where we are. We have the cast iron furnace of discipline, and we've secured the psychological oxygen autonomy, competence, and relatedness to keep the fire burning brightly without destroying the furnace.
We are motivated and we are structured.
Right. But how do we apply this to actually master a complex skill? Because just putting in the hours and just showing up with a good attitude, that isn't enough to reach elite levels of performance.
No, it's not. That is the hard truth of skill acquisition. Showing up is really only half the battle.
Which is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
It is. But to understand why so many people get stuck, despite putting in the time, we have to look at the illusion of naive practice.
Okay, naive practice. Let's bring in Anders Ericsson and his research on the OK Plateau, which was heavily featured in the Success magazine sources.
Yes. If you've ever tried to learn a new language or play an instrument, or honestly even just improve your typing speed, you have intimately experienced the OK Plateau.
It's a universal phenomenon, isn't it?
It really is. You start learning a skill, and for the first few months, your progress is incredibly rapid. Every single hour of practice yields visible improvement.
Because it's all new.
Right. But eventually, you reach a point where the skill becomes automatic. You hit an acceptable level of performance, the OK Plateau, and your brain simply stops actively engaging with the mechanics of the task.
Think about how you type on a keyboard. When you first learned, you had to consciously think about where every single letter was.
You're hunting and pecking.
Exactly. And you improved really quickly. But now, you probably type at a decent speed, maybe 60 words a minute, and you have likely typed at that exact same speed for the last 10 years.
Right. You typed every single day. You are logging hundreds and hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
But you haven't gotten one single word per minute faster.
Why is that? Because you stopped actively trying to improve. You went into autopilot.
And Ericsson defines this autopilot state as naive practice. It is just mindless repetition.
Like the musician who plays the exact same song perfectly over and over.
Or the golfer who just goes to the driving range and hits bucket after bucket of balls without any critical evaluation of their swing.
Naive practice is tricky because it creates a very dangerous, false sense of achievement.
It does, because you feel productive, you are putting in the time, you're sweating, you're tired.
But your actual cognitive growth is absolutely zero.
Exactly zero. Yeah. So to smash through the OK Plateau, you have to transition to what Ericsson calls deliberate practice.
And deliberate practice has a fundamentally different anatomy than just messing around. It is not just doing the thing, it is systematically breaking the thing apart.
Yes. And it requires 4 non-negotiable components.
Let's list those out.
First, you need highly specific goals. Not just, I want to get better at guitar, but rather, I want to master this specific chord transition at 120 beats per minute.
Okay, hyper-specific. What's the second?
Second, it requires maximum undistracted focus. No phone, No TV in the background.
Makes sense.
Third, you must be working continuously at the absolute edge of your current ability.
The edge, meaning the point where you're actually making mistakes.
Yes, if you aren't failing occasionally, you aren't practicing deliberately. And fourth, and arguably the most critical component, you must have immediate feedback.
The feedback loop. That is the ultimate necessity. It is the piece that almost everyone misses when they try to teach themselves a new skill.
Oh, absolutely. You can set specific goals, you can push yourself to the edge, but without a reliable system for knowing exactly what you are doing wrong in real time, adjustment is impossible.
And skill acquisition is entirely about micro adjustments.
Notice how perfectly this ties back into self-determination theory, too.
Oh, right.
Because without clear, immediate feedback, you cannot satisfy your psychological need for competence. If you don't know the precise gap between where you are and where you need to be, you are essentially practicing in the dark.
You just feel lost, which is why expert coaching or mentorship or highly structured data systems accelerate growth in ways that isolated, self-directed effort simply cannot match.
You need an external, objective view of your performance to correct your blind spots.
Okay, let's make this highly tangible for the listener. The sources include a breakdown of the Notion SAT dashboard created by an educational platform called Sparkle.
Yes, this is a great example.
And even if you are years removed from taking a standardized test, the architecture of this dashboard is an absolute masterclass in designing a system for deliberate practice. You can apply this structure to literally any pursuit.
The Sparkle dashboard is brilliant because it isn't just a calendar or a basic to-do list. It is an environment specifically designed to physically force deliberate practice.
How does it do that?
Well, it utilizes interconnected databases to manage the cognitive load of studying. For example, the core of the system is a question log.
Right.
Every single missed question is logged, analyzed, and tagged by exact type and difficulty.
So instead of a vague goal like, I need to study math today, the dashboard diagnoses the precise weakness. It tells the student, you are consistently failing at command of evidence questions in the reading section.
Exactly. It pinpoints the exact edge of their ability, so they know where to apply that maximum focus we talked about.
Furthermore, it schedules daily study blocks using the Pomodoro technique,
Which forces that maximum focus for short, intense bursts, usually like 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off.
right, which totally prevents the brain from slipping into autopilot.
And it uses predictive formulas to show progress, turning raw effort into actionable data. They teach a very specific decision loop.
Let's hear the loop.
It goes like this. Review your past performance. Diagnose what dropped. Plan 3 highly focused tasks targeting that exact gap. Execute the tasks and measure the results.
Review, diagnose, plan, execute, measure. It entirely removes the emotion and the guesswork from studying.
It is the ultimate antidote to naive practice.
To use another analogy here, naive practice is like driving a car on cruise control on a straight, empty highway in the middle of the day.
Your brain basically turns off.
Exactly. You are moving forward, but you aren't really driving. Deliberate practice is like driving a manual transmission sports car on a winding, icy mountain road at night.
Oh, man.
Right. You have to be hyper-present. You're constantly shifting gears, feeling the traction of the tires, and adjusting to immediate feedback from the road.
That's a perfect visualization. And the research highlights a pretty sobering reality about this. Practicing badly is often worse than not practicing at all.
Wait, worse than not practicing? How is that possible?
Because when you engage in naive practice, you aren't just stagnating. You are heavily reinforcing and myelinating bad habits, which makes them much, much harder to unlearn later.
You're basically paving a road in the wrong direction.
Exactly. And this phenomenon of stagnation is actually a massive systemic issue in global education right now, which is driving a major shift in pedagogical structures.
Which brings us perfectly to the European Commission's 2025 STEM Education Strategic Plan, and specifically the rising dominance of microlearning.
Yes, the European Union is facing a significant crisis in skill acquisition right now. Nearly 30% of their 15-year-olds are failing to achieve minimum proficiency in mathematics and science.
30%? That is a huge number.
It is. And to meet the massive demands of the upcoming digital and green economic transitions, they need a profound improvement in STEM education.
So what's going wrong with the current system?
Well, the traditional model of 2-hour lectures and massive textbook reading assignments is basically breeding the OK plateau on a continental scale.
Kids are just zoning out.
Right. The solution gaining the most empirical support right now is microlearning.
Microlearning flips the traditional model entirely on its head, doesn't it?
It does. Instead of 2-hour marathons, learning is broken down into short, highly focused chunks, typically just 5 to 10 minutes.
Now, I know some people will say, oh, that's just catering to TikTok attention spans. But it's not, is it?
No, not at all. It's not about catering to shorter attention spans. It's about aligning the delivery of information with how the human brain actually encodes and stores data.
Let's look at the cognitive science validating microlearning, because it rests on 4 main pillars. The first is spaced repetition.
Right. Over a century of psychological research has consistently proven that spacing out repeated encounters with material over time produces vastly superior long-term retention compared to massed practice.
Mass practice is essentially just cramming.
Exactly. Staring at a book for 6 hours the night before a test. A 2016 meta-analysis actually demonstrated that spaced training improves retention by 20 to 30%.
That is a massive advantage. Okay, the second pillar is cognitive load management. STEM subjects are incredibly complex.
Highly complex. And if you try to teach a student 5 new algebra concepts in a single hour, their working memory literally overflows and they retain almost nothing.
It's like trying to fill a shot glass with a fire hose.
Exactly. So breaking concepts down to micro sessions prevents cognitive overload.
Okay, the third pillar is active retrieval, which is also known as the testing effect.
Active retrieval is crucial. In a micro-learning environment, every session acts as a mini-test. You aren't just passively reading a textbook. You are forced to actively pull the information out of your memory.
And the physical act of retrieving the memory strengthens the neural pathway far more effectively than simply rereading the material.
Yep. Rereading just gives you the illusion of fluency. Retrieving actually builds the memory.
And the fourth pillar brings us right back to deliberate practice. Immediate feedback loops.
Because the sessions are only 5 minutes long, the learner gets immediate correction while the logic of the problem is still totally fresh in their mind.
They don't spend an hour practicing the wrong formula and ingraining a huge mistake.
Exactly.
Now, beyond those 4 pillars, platforms operating in this microlearning space, like Graspable, utilize a profound structural tool called the knowledge component graph.
Yes, the knowledge component graph.
I find this concept absolutely fascinating because one of the biggest hurdles in learning anything complex is just the feeling of being completely lost.
Oh, yeah. You learn a random fact on Tuesday, a new formula on Wednesday, and it feels like you are being handed random puzzle pieces without ever seeing the picture on the front of the box.
Exactly. You have no idea how it all fits together.
The knowledge component graph solves this by providing a visual map of how every single concept connects.
So it shows the learner that, for example, solving linear equations directly depends on understanding variables, and that mastering both of those builds the bridge towards systems of equations.
It reveals the architecture of the entire subject.
It fundamentally builds a sense of competence and relatedness to the material. You can literally look at the graph and see, okay, I have mastered 15 out of these 38 interconnected concepts.
It demystifies the entire journey.
It proves that mastery is not about the sheer volume of time you spend staring at a book. It is entirely about the quality, structure, and frequency of the engagement.
10 minutes of deeply focused active retrieval every day will absolutely destroy 70 minutes of passive cramming once a week. Every single time.
So we have established a very powerful framework up to this point. We have the disciplined habits to sustain action.
We have the psychological environment of self-determination to prevent burnout.
And we have the precise architecture of deliberate practice and microlearning to ensure rapid skill acquisition. But there is a ceiling to all of this if we don't address the physical medium where all this is happening.
The brain itself.
Right. To sustain this level of intense, focused, cognitive effort over weeks, months, and years, we cannot just rely on software upgrades. We have to upgrade the physical hardware.
We need to talk about the ultimate biological catalyst.
Yeah.
Exercise as a nootropic.
The separation of physical fitness and cognitive performance is honestly one of the great fallacies of modern society.
It really is. We treat them as totally separate domains.
But if you are going to demand elite-level focus, memory encoding, and neuroplasticity from your brain, you have to create a biological environment capable of actually supporting that demand.
You need the right physical foundation.
So when people hear the word nootropic, they usually think of smart drugs.
Right. They think of Silicon Valley biohackers taking exotic supplements or college students pounding energy drinks and caffeine pills.
But let's look at the foundational 1972 definition of a nootropic, which was coined by a Romanian chemist named Corneliu Drugea. This is detailed in the IIT Tech Ambit piece.
Georgia established very strict criteria for this. To be a true nootropic, an agent must measurably enhance cognitive performance, such as memory, focus, processing speed, or learning capacity in a healthy brain.
And it has to do this through a defined biological mechanism while possessing very low toxicity and side effects, right?
Exactly. And by that strict original definition, exercise isn't just a healthy lifestyle choice. It is the most potent nootropic on Earth.
Vastly superior to caffeine.
Oh, absolutely. Caffeine only provides an acute, temporary illusion of energy by blocking adenosine receptors.
It just stops you from feeling how tired you actually are.
Right. It doesn't actually give you energy or build brain capacity. And exercise is also superior to synthetic nootropics like C-Max or Bacopa, which require constant dosing, have very questionable long-term efficacy, and often carry side effects.
Exercise physically changes the structure of the brain and compounds those changes over time.
To truly grasp how exercise achieves this, we need a brief, high-level primer on the neurochemistry of focus and intelligence.
Let's do a quick crash course.
So focus is executed in the brain by an antagonistic pair of neurotransmitters, glutamate and GABA.
Glutamate and GABA.
Yes. Glutamate is the accelerator. It fires the neurons that encode new data. GABA acts as the brakes. It silences background noise so you can differentiate the signal from the noise.
But glutamate and GABA are just the foot soldiers executing the orders, right? The chemicals commanding what you focus on are acetylcholine and norepinephrine.
Exactly. Acetylcholine is released from the basal forebrain and washes over the cortex. Its main job is to sharpen the signal-to-noise ratio.
So it controls the absolute precision of your attention.
Yes, it acts like a sniper's scope, allowing you to lock onto a highly specific task and filter out irrelevant distractions. When acetylcholine is low, you experience mental fogginess and distraction.
And norepinephrine, which is produced in the locus coeruleus, controls the intensity of the response.
Right, it acts as an amplifier for the signal.
So how does physical movement actually upgrade this complex chemical hardware? We need to split this into two categories because aerobic exercise like running or cycling and resistance training like lifting heavy weights, they do very different complementary things to the brain.
Let's start with aerobic exercise.
Okay. Running and cardio.
When you engage in sustained, moderate to high intensity aerobic exercise, say a 45-minute run, your working muscles release a significant amount of lactate, as well as a hormone called irisin.
Lactate and irisin.
Right. And both of these molecules possess the unique ability to cross the blood-brain barrier.
Think of them as messengers carrying a VI key pass directly into the brain.
Exactly. Once inside, they bind to specific receptors, which activate a cascade known as the CRB pathway.
And the CRB pathway is essentially a biological 3D printer that manufactures the holy grail of brain chemicals, BDNF.
Brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Yes.
BDNF is often described as miracle grow for the brain.
Miracle Grow, that's quite a title.
It earns it. Its primary function is to drive neurogenesis, which is the literal birth of brand new neurons.
And in the adult brain, this neurogenesis occurs almost exclusively in one place, right?
The dentate gyrus of the hippocampus.
And the hippocampus is the critical brain region responsible for memory consolidation, spatial navigation, and learning.
The research on this is just staggering. Consistent aerobic exercise physically increases the volume and density of the hippocampus.
Wait, it physically gets bigger?
Yes. Studies have shown an increase in hippocampal volume of up to 3.4% in adults who maintain a consistent running routine.
You are physically enlarging the memory center of your brain just by going for a run. That is wild.
It is. And BDNF doesn't just build new neurons, it strengthens the survival of existing ones, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which elevates your capacity for sustained attention.
It also acts as a profound buffer against cortisol, doesn't it?
It does. Chronic stress produces high levels of cortisol, which is highly toxic to the brain. Over time, it literally shrinks the hippocampus. BDNF acts as a neuroprotective shield against that degradation.
Which, from an evolutionary standpoint, makes perfect sense. Early humans weren't running just for fun on a treadmill.
No, if you were running, you were either hunting an animal, tracking it across novel terrain, or you were being hunted.
Both of which required intense, hyper-focused cognitive mapping of your environment. Your brain flooded with BDNF to ensure you learn the new landscape instantly so you could survive.
And we can hack that ancient survival mechanism today just by getting on a bike or a treadmill.
A rigorous aerobic session creates a massive, acute spike in BDNF that lasts for 30 to 60 minutes after the workout, right?
Yes. Which makes the immediate post-workout window the absolute optimal time to engage in a cognitively demanding, deliberate practice session.
That is such a good life hack. Work out, then sit down and study immediately.
Furthermore, over months of consistent aerobic activity, the physical density of your dopamine D2 receptors actually increases.
Oh, so it reverses the doom scrolling damage.
Exactly. Your brain becomes more sensitive and efficient at utilizing dopamine, which structurally elevates your baseline motivation levels.
Okay, so aerobic exercise grows the hippocampus, spikes BDNF, and repairs our dopamine receptors. What about picking up heavy things? Because resistance training doesn't spike BDNF directly in the same way, does it?
No. Resistance training operates through a parallel, equally powerful pathway. When you perform heavy compound movements like deadlifts or squats, the intense mechanical stress on the muscle fibers triggers the pituitary gland to release human growth hormone.
And this hormone travels to the liver, which then secretes a cascade of IGF-1.
Insulin-like growth factor, yes.
IGF-1 also crosses the blood-brain barrier, but its main nootropic effect isn't neurogenesis. It is heavily involved in supporting synaptic plasticity.
Synaptic plasticity is the ability of synapses to strengthen or weaken over time. IGF-1 increases the density and strength of the actual synaptic connections where memories are physically encoded.
But IGF-1 does something else that is absolutely remarkable, and we have to talk about it. It actively supports and promotes myelination.
Yes, myelination.
We have to explain myelination because this is the absolute secret to processing speed.
It is. So axons are the long, thread-like cables that transmit electrical signals between neurons.
And myelin is a fatty white substance that wraps around these axons. It acts exactly like the rubber insulation on a copper electrical wire.
Right. When an axon lacks insulation, the electrical signal can leak or dissipate, slowing down the transmission. But when an axon is heavily myelinated, the electrical signal doesn't actually travel the full length of the cable.
Instead, it literally jumps.
Yes, it jumps between small gaps in the myelin sheath, which are called the nodes of Ranvier.
The nodes of Ranvier.
This jumping mechanism allows the neural transmission to travel at incredibly high speeds. A heavily myelinated neural pathway can transmit signals up to 100 times faster than an unmyelinated one.
100 times faster. That is literally the difference between an old dial-up modem and fiber optic broadband.
Exactly. A thicker, more compact myelin sheath enhances the speed, timing, and fidelity of the neural signal. This translates directly to higher raw processing speed, faster recall, and sharper cognition in your daily life.
And beyond myelination, heavy compound lifting triggers an acute spike in testosterone in both men and women,
which significantly upregulates dopamine synthesis. The psychological afterglow of lifting heavy weights is highly centered on feelings of confidence, motivation, and a readiness to tackle difficult tasks.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We often view intelligence and cognitive capacity as a static genetic ceiling.
Like you get what you're born with.
Right. And yes, our sources note that adult intelligence is highly heritable, perhaps up to 80% genetic. But the reality is that the vast majority of us are operating nowhere near our genetic ceiling.
Not even close.
You have the mechanical ability to physically push yourself toward that limit. You can run to physically expand your hippocampus and generate new brain cells.
You can lift heavy weights to thicken the insulation on your neural networks so your brain processes information 100 times faster.
Physical movement is not a distraction from cognitive work. It is a direct mechanical lever for cognitive expansion.
And crucially, both forms of exercise drastically decrease chronically elevated cortisol.
Because high cortisol does the exact opposite of everything we just discussed.
Yes. It promotes neuron death, degrades myelin sheaths, disrupts the precision of acetylcholine, and literally shrinks the hippocampus. Exercise is the physical armor that protects the magnificent brain you are trying to build through deliberate practice.
So let's pull all of this together and synthesize the blueprint. You now have the ultimate toolkit for self-mastery. We started by looking at the initial spark. Desire and dopamine are powerful. They get you off the couch and point you at the target.
But we know they are chemically fragile and will absolutely fade under stress.
So you build the cast iron furnace. You establish the discipline and the structural habits that carve enduring automatic neural pathways, freeing you from the reliance on temporary emotion.
But to protect your mental health and prevent burnout within that disciplined structure, you apply self-determination theory.
You ensure that your pursuits satisfy your fundamental psychological needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. You transition from being driven by external guilt to operating with integrated, autonomous motivation.
And then, when it is time to actually sit down and acquire the skill, you completely reject the illusion of naive practice.
You implement the architecture of deliberate practice and microlearning. You set hyper-specific goals, engage in focused 5 to 10-minute bursts of active retrieval, and rely on immediate, objective feedback loops to smash through the OK plateau.
And to sustain all of this intense cognitive effort, you physically upgrade your brain's hardware.
You use aerobic exercise to flood the cortex with BDNF, growing the memory centers of the brain, and you use resistance training to release IGF-1, insulating your neural networks for lightning-fast processing speed.
It's an incredible system.
This has been an incredibly deep journey through the mechanics of human potential. But as we wrap up, I want to hand it over to you for a final thought.
We've spent this time discussing how discipline, deliberate practice, and rigorous exercise literally change the physical architecture of your brain. We're talking about growing the hippocampus, insulating axons, and forging dense new neural pathways. This implies something incredibly profound about human existence. Every single choice you make, every time you choose to sit down and focus, every time you choose to push through a workout, it isn't just a fleeting action.
It's physical.
It is an act of physical self-sculpting. You aren't just changing your habits. You are physically building a new brain, cell by cell, connection by connection. So the ultimate question is this. Based on your actions today, what kind of brain are you building for tomorrow?
That is a staggering thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. You are now armed with the actual biological and psychological blueprints to go out and master whatever it is you have been putting off.
The tools are all there.
The midnight motivation might get you started, but now you have the systems and the science to actually go the distance. The power to rewire your own potential is entirely in your hands. Until next time, keep digging deeper.